And welcome back to the Hot Lap. Today we are asking, is there any hope for 2024? Hopefully we will give you some. We're keeping our fingers crossed here at the Hot Lap. So the headlines: Red Bull will be caught, according to Christian Horner. I think many people are absolutely praying he's right, asking Santa Claus for that to be the case as well. I know I will be. The MP418 Newey's failure and why that may give us hope going into the 2024 season. Yeah, an old McLaren car. Also, McLaren showed it can be done from Carlos Sainz, and because of that reason, he's got a lot of hope for Ferrari coming into 2024. And Stroll Sr, Lawrence Stroll, saying he's here to stay at Aston Martin. They are not going anywhere with all these reports suggesting that they are going to sell. But let's get into the first headline. Red Bull will be caught. Now, Horner believes that in F1 2024, next year, they'll see Red Bull come under threat due to diminishing returns with these stable regulations. Okay, fair enough. We kind of saw that in 2021, but that did need a bit of a tweak of the rake, let's say, which really hurt Mercedes. But we had, because of that, an incredible 2021 season. That's not the case here. But Horner also said this in 2022, thinking 2023 is going to be a lot closer. Sadly, as we all know, it was quite the opposite. But as we know, the article says Red Bull enjoyed the most dominant year of any team in history in the sport in 2023. Verstappen romping his way to those 19 victories. Sergio Perez on 2. But yes, now given Red Bull's performance advantage, it says, over the rest, it actually increased in 2023. And what is going to happen for 2024? Will it be more of the same? Christian Horner, though, is saying that these stable regulations means diminishing returns in 2024. Now, while the rulebook remains, as we know, the same, there are no big changes going into the 2024 season. There are far fewer opportunities to make big leaps in performance as teams approach the performance, it says, the performance ceiling of what's possible under these regulations, a point that Red Bull will, in theory, hit earlier than other teams. Now, it's for this reason that Christian Horner is not optimistic that Red Bull can dominate to the same extent as they did this year. And he opened up on next season's prospects in an exclusive interview with Planet F1. He said, "We've got stable regulations," he said. When asked about the rumours about whether Red Bull have this huge step from the RB20, and there are all these rumours that the RB19 was kind of like an evolution of the RB18 to the 2022 car. They made it. It was a really solid car, and they just evolved it into the 2023 car. And there's all these rumours of revolution, not evolution, going into the RB20. One of the reasons why these next cars are quite important, we've got that big change in 2026, right? So the teams really need to get the 2024 cars right, because these are going to be very similar cars potentially that are going to be raced in 2025, because everyone's going to be concentrating on those 2026 regulations. But anyway, I digress. Horner was saying we've got these stable regulations, and of course you start to hit the top of the curve where the gains that you're making become smaller and smaller. I think that it's evolution, not revolution. There you go, exactly what we just said. And we're into diminishing returns now, but there are 2 more years of these regulations, and it's inevitable that the grid will concertina. He said, while Horner reckons the point has been reached, the article goes on to say, development gains which become infinitesimal. That's a nice word for me to try. Infinitesimal for his squad. It's worth remembering the fact that Red Bull operated in 2023 with let's be fair, a significant wind tunnel deficit. And as a result of being at the top of the championship in obviously 22 and 23, adding to their, let's say, punishment for breaching the cost cap in 2021. That punishment, was found out in 2022, and they were given it. It's therefore possible Red Bull could have hit the ceiling before this point had they been without restriction. Now, Horner feels the wind tunnel punishment prevented them from reaching the full potential for the RB19. It's always difficult to say, but I mean, the wind tunnel hasn't helped for next year, he said. Thankfully, we had a competitive car this year, so we should actually transfer quite a lot of focus reasonably early for us onto next year's car. That's going to scare quite a lot of people, and these rumours are coming out that the car is completely different. They're going through a complete change, kind of very similar to what Toto Wolff is saying about Mercedes. The car's going to be completely different for next year. But and here's the thing where I maybe want to offer you a bit of help, is the MP4 18, the Newey failure. Now, the race has got a couple of things. They've got an awesome article, which we'll get into on it. They've also got Bring Back V10s. If you go to Bring Back V10s in their podcast, there's an episode, I think, I'm not exactly sure which one, but there's an episode fairly early on-ish where they talk about the MP4-18, the downfall of Newey's infamous unraced McLaren, and it ended up being quite a dangerous car. But this was the McLaren realised in 2002 that their car wasn't good enough. Ferrari absolutely dominated. We need to do something. So Adrian Newey then took the car and completely changed, almost every component. Went really radical, kind of like the rumours coming out of Red Bull for next year. And the McLaren, let's just say it wasn't the best car. I mean, it says that it's a big claim, obviously, Newey's on race car, given how many cars have failed to turn a wheel and anger over the years. But the majority of those have belonged to small teams, a la Lola, if you remember, where there's a charm to those stories. The cars have never made it. It's nothing that quite compares to what should have been a World Championship challenger. And it's there you go, season 1, episode 3. Now, McLaren made it clear in November 2002 that its 2003 car would be released during the season rather than before it. Now, that wasn't as alarming as it would be today. Ferrari had done the same with their 2002 car and was planning to also release its 2003 car late. Back in the days of extensive winter testing, F1 teams are testing all the time. McLaren set about updating their 2002 car, which ended up being the MP4-17D. It won a race. It potentially it won a couple of races. I think we Coulthard and Raikkonen won a race in Malaysia, and Raikkonen nearly won the World Championship. He nearly won it at the Nürburgring as well, but I think he had that failure. But the car was going so well that Coulthard, who had been cautious about the decision, was happy it was worth the wait for a car who was promised would be a big step forward, this MP4-18. Now, Mark Priestley said what would be fairly common back then would be to finish the season, take a couple of weeks off, then start again with that year's car, but with next year's rear end on it. He said, I remember we had a briefing with Neil Oatley. We'd been put in charge of the updated car, and his explanation was that they're trying to push in so many extreme ways with this MP4-18. It was well worth doing that. If we're going to catch Ferrari, we'd have to go way beyond what people considered normal. So it's perfectly reasonable to wait a bit longer. Newey called the 2002 car a clumsy design, not one of my best, which you put down to the implementation of this weird McLaren's matrix structure, which was brought about by Ron Dennis. But anyway, we digress. The D spec was turning heads, though, even in testing, because people were saying they're worried about McLaren. This was last year's car, the 2002 car, into that 2003 season, but we're not talking about that. So the pressure ramps up. So Ferrari obviously bring their new car in 2003 at the Spanish Grand Prix, and it won on its debut. And then it was Coulthard and the team were kind of feeling the pressure to get this car. And the car finally launches. The MP4-18 was launched on May the 20th, delivering on McLaren's promise that it would look radically different. And it did. It had that small, it looks amazing. It's one of the nicest looking cars. Definitely one of the nicest looking cars that never raced, as you can see here. And obviously in our headline. And it looked radically different. Newey had focused on taking the first steps toward the extreme rear end packaging that is the norm in F1 today, why he's done so well at Red Bull. And he said the new design had more research than any other car. And he admitted the delays had been frustrating, adding that McLaren had underestimated the level of resources required to keep one car racing competitively and trying to develop one in the season. Now, despite Schumacher building this momentum with the 2003 car and taking the championship lead from Raikkonen, McLaren stated publicly that it was leaning towards being cautious with this new car. And Priestley said if we'd been on a regular timescale and having this car race in March, it would have been running long before then. But, and here's the big but, there were troubles in testing. Yes, the MP4-18, it started running on track, and they realised, despite all this revolution they had, it had major problems. The packaging meant it was really, really unreliable, and mechanics needed to be ready with fire extinguishers. Priestley said the guys on the test team were coming back from the test with the most horrendous reports. They already hated it after the first test. It was difficult to work on. It was coming back from every run on fire. Changes were hard to make on it, and you had to remove huge chunks of suspension, he said, to take the floor off. And here we go. I mean, Alex Wirtz had a crash in it. Raikkonen, I think, had a crash in it. It said once McLaren started pushing for performance and testing the new car, it became clear the design was unpredictable on track. Test driver, as I said, Wirtz and Raikkonen have been crashed. The statements in public from McLaren claimed the car was fast but unreliable, but behind the scenes, Newey had worked out that he had a big problem on his hands. The car was essentially aerodynamically unstable, and once he got to the bottom of this problem, he wanted a chassis redesign. In his book, he says how to build a car. Newey wrote the problem was related to the shape of the chassis and the front of the side pod overloading the vortex that forms off a delta wing in just in front of the side pod. Don't know what you mean there, but I mean you can read it on the article. But the issue is the car was not good enough. It was unreliable and it was aerodynamically unpredictable. Think like an extreme version of Lewis Hamilton complaining about the Mercedes rear. And because of that reason, it was never ever raced, because they went so far for the extreme Adrian Newey did that they built in essentially what was a bad car. Therefore, and here's the kicker, Red Bull, are they going to be taking loads and loads of risks like Newey did with that MP418? It's going to be really interesting, isn't it? But anyway, I digress. So Sainz has said McLaren F1's turnaround shows what Ferrari can achieve over the winter. This is from motorsport.com. Sainz said he's perfectly confident Ferrari can catch Red Bull at the start of 2024 based on the mid-season gains made by Formula One rival McLaren. Now, Ferrari finished third in the standings with fewer than half the points of Red Bull. But Sainz thinks Ferrari can use the off-season to erase that gap. And he obviously cites this McLaren turnaround. And if we remember, McLaren were one of the worst teams at Bahrain. I mean, I think, Piastri didn't even start. Lando Norris, they did so many pit stops. They were absolutely a joke. They were the laughing stock. And McLaren even admitted coming into the launch that their car was going to be rubbish, if you read between the lines. And it was. But then, was it Austria, when they introduced the new car, Austria and Silverstone, they had an amazing car. And arguably, at that point, they were the second fastest team. And who knows, I mean, with a tiny bit of luck, they potentially could have won a race as well. So asked about the prospects of challenging Red Bull, Sainz said, I think it has to be our realistic aim. Yes, Will we manage to do it? Only time will tell. He said, I want the team to be thinking that it's possible because I believe it is. Also, we've proven that if McLaren have been able to do these steps during the season, I'm confident Ferrari can do it over the winter break. Why? Well, you don't have all that pressure. The pressure's kind of off during the season, off season, in terms of you're not racing a team. Absolute focus can be on that car. So you can make an argument, they can even make a bigger jump going into the season. Now, McLaren failed to score a point in the opening two races, but following a three-stage upgrade that transformed the aerodynamics, Oscar Piastri ended up winning a race, albeit, yes, it was a sprint race. And since the SF23 proved strong in qualifying, the Ferrari car, as shown by both sides, and especially Leclerc towards the end of the year, he ended up scoring, a total of 7 pole positions. The Spaniard reckoned the Scuderia need to focus on making the car an all-rounder, meaning the Ferrari was always seems to be better in qualifying than the race, but that gap definitely narrowed. I mean, the Japanese Grand Prix, we all thought Mercedes they were out-qualified by Ferrari, for example, but they'd come and beat them in the race, and they started to struggle toward the end of the year, did the Mercedes team. And underlying his faith in the designers, scientists, hoping to turn things around, he continued, I trust the team, I trust that the capacity we've had back home to turn things around. So, fingers crossed, but I think Ferrari can do it. We know this is the team. Yes, there have been personnel changes, but there's still the people there that helped design that 2022 car, which at the beginning of the season was better than Red Bull. It was more reliable, and you can make an argument it was at times faster than the Red Bull team, and then the development just fell off a cliff, didn't it, in the end? But there we go. That's why I think there's definitely hope for the Ferrari. So Lawrence Stroll, this is on planetf1.com by Jamie Woodhouse. Lawrence Stroll gives definitive answer to swirling Aston Martin sale rumours. So he's basically reaffirmed his commitment, quashing all talk of this impending sale, which kind of seemed to be the norm, especially in the second half of 2023, the season. Stroll's association with the team, as we know, began when he purchased, essentially, which was Force India in 2018 and named it Racing Point. And then it was then made Aston Martin in 2021. And Lawrence Stroll said has basically come out and said he's not selling the Aston Martin F1 team. But as we know, he's heavily invested into it to the point where this year they were the second fastest team at the beginning of the year. I mean, it was amazing. Complete opposite to McLaren. And there are these rumours that Stroll could be looking to sell the team. Now, obviously, he's made them a force to be reckoned with in 2023, with the confirmation that he had sold a minority stake to some of his partners. But he's come out and said that's not the case. Craig Slater recently from Sky suggested he could see why team owners such as Stroll and one third Mercedes owner Toto Wolff may be looking to cash in. But Stroll has said no. Be interesting if his tune changes towards the year. Once again, I've always said if you're a serious team, you can't have Lance Stroll racing in that car. Lance Stroll cost you Aston Martin in the Constructors' Championship against McLaren. It's plain and simple. Look what Alonso can do with that car. But there we go. I digress. Anyway, this has been the Hot Lap. If you've liked it, if you like us, please like and subscribe. That would be amazing. If you made it to the end, let us know. If you've got a comment, we'll try and get in touch with you ASAP. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. We'll speak to you soon.